A Dragon's Love by R.S. Holloway. A Romancely.com story. Chapter 1. The pulse raced in Joy Roberts' veins as she hid behind the dumpster. It was a seedy alleyway, hardly what she would have expected for a meeting between a Triad representative and the official in charge of organized crime for the Shanghai government. But then again, it was oddly fitting. Wen Fulong had been appointed to his position only weeks ago by the central Chinese government, and had made headlines by swearing to finally tackle the corruption and crime within Shanghai. However, as this meeting proved, the supposed super cop from Beijing was just as dirty as almost every other official she had investigated so far in China. Joy filmed another 30 seconds of footage, enough for her story, before shutting off the camera and pulling further back into the shadows. It was a dangerous enough job, investigating the connections between the Triad and the central government. She knew she was making enemies on both sides of Chinese law, and if it wasn't for the fact she was waiting to release the worst evidence until after she was out of the country, she knew she could end up missing. She had seen it happen before. Pulling a stinking piece of cardboard over her head to fully camouflage herself, Joy wondered again just what had led her to accepting the assignment to China. Actually, she knew what it was. Graduating from Georgetown with a degree in journalism 5 years ago, she quickly found that for black women like her, the big networks and media outlets had preconceived notions of what she could do. She could do sports, local affairs, or cultural pieces, which was media industry doublespeak for black people stories. If she moved further south, with her looks, she could also land a gig as one of the talking heads on the nightly news, or be a weather girl. But for Joy, the reason she went into journalism wasn't to cover football, do fluff pieces on Girl Scout bake sales, or be the token voice every time Black History Month rolled around. She went into journalism because she was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and even at a young age recognized the power that flowed through the halls of Congress. She wanted to be the voice covering those stories, not just for black people, but for all people. Unfortunately for her, the only media outlets that were initially willing to give her a chance were the black media such as Essence, Jet, or BET. While she had no particular biases against them, she knew that once she accepted a staff job with the black media, she would forever be branded a black journalist, and not just a journalist. Even if she won a Pulitzer, it would be as a Pulitzer Prize-winning black journalist. Thankfully, this assignment from the Asian Economic Review came just in time. While normally concerned with the cut and dry world of business, the AER had recently become more interested in the interplay of government, business, and organized crime, especially in China and Japan. Joy had been able to finagle an interview and, despite everything, get the assignment. She had flown to Beijing 6 months ago expecting some real work. What she saw when she arrived was an eye-opener. The Shanghai AER offices were pathetic, barely larger than her apartment when she had been living in Georgetown, with most of the staff sitting around on their asses all day, retyping and regurgitating press releases sent out by the Chinese companies and government. "You don't want to ruffle feathers around here," the senior reporter, a withered old guy named Tompkins, had told her. "You piss off the wrong folks and the Triad will find you." Joy had refused to accept the advice, although she had decided to remain cautious. Working almost totally on her own, she had gone out making whatever connections she could, working with charity groups, underground churches, and every other group she could to foster the connections she needed. There had been some low-level payoffs, mostly out-of-favor officials who were caught with the wrong Triad group, but tonight's filming was the first real scoop of her career. Joy waited until almost sunup, dozing when she could underneath the stinking garbage, only making a break for it after she was sure it was safe. Back in her tiny apartment, she scrubbed herself from head to toe in the tepid water that came from her excuse of a water heater, using the fragrant cocoa butter soap that was her only luxury here in China. Gulping down a cup of double-strength green tea, she headed to the office, taking the bus. Corrupt or not, she had to admit the Shanghai government ran a very clean public transportation system. When she got into the office, she was surprised to see she had a visitor. Long Pao Billy Chin was a Hong Kong missionary who she had befriended soon after arriving in Shanghai. Born in Hong Kong just a few years before the Chinese takeover and educated in the United States, Billy also wanted to combat the corruption in China, albeit in his own way. "Hey, Joy," he said in his California-accented English, a welcome sound after the months of either international or British pronunciation. "So, how was your stakeout?" "Got the goods, Billy," she said, patting her purse. "Once I get this out of the country, Fulong's going to find himself on the front page." "I hope so, but you never know," Billy said sadly, sipping at his tea. Joy plopped down in her desk chair, turning to face him. "What's that mean?" "It means that regardless of what you have, the central government has some sway that you might not be able to overcome. They have a lot of money to throw around, and Fulong's politically connected, but I don't want to argue with you about that. Instead, I wanted to see if you might be willing to go with me on a trip. It might just get you a story." "Go on," Joy said, plugging in her laptop and copying over the file. She couldn't trust sending the file via normal internet, but with some VPNs and other routes, she might just be able to slip it through. It would at least be some sort of backup if the actual physical data card was stolen in transit. "What's the deal?" "Well, one of my new parishioners came to me last week with a pretty fantastic story. It seems that a few 100 kilometers west of Shanghai, north of Wuhan, there's an area that the Triads just don't go. So, they're interested in money, and a lot of those countryside villages don't have any." Billy shook his head. "It's not that. I mean, we're talking not even traveling through. Central government avoids the area too, as much as possible. I took a look at a map, and there's like this triangle between Wuhan, Xinjiang, and Hefei that has almost nothing. Close to Hefei is this tiny city called Luan, but after that, nothing. A road travels through it, but that's it. No major towns, no governmental bases, nothing. I had to go to some old paper maps to even start to figure out where this place might be." Joy sat forward, intrigued by Billy's story. And in a really old map, I mean at least 200 years old, there is a place that matches up. Get this, though, the name is going to make you chuckle. "Okay, I'm game. What's the name?" "Longwei. It means Dragon Blood Fields." Joy smiled, enjoying the implication. "Come on, Billy. Don't tell me that you, with your church background and your UCLA diploma, are a believer in those old myths? I mean, really? Dragons?" Billy smiled cryptically and folded his fingers under his chin. "Well, there are some translations of the Bible that include the mention of dragons. Who knows? Either way, it could be an interesting story, and you could afford to get out of Shanghai for a while. The smog isn't good for you, and you're not as invisible as you might think. There are some in Shanghai who are paying attention to you that you do not want attention from. That's a lot of words to say I've got Triads interested in me, Billy. Not just Triads, Joy. All of the Triads you've exposed are replaceable men, minor flunkies. The government men, though, they're a little more valuable." Joy thought it over for a moment. If Billy was correct, the trip could make a great story, maybe even a series of stories, and give her another angle to work on how China could defeat the Triads. If it wasn't, it would probably still give her enough for a few human interest stories, and some necessary time away from Shanghai to get some perspective. "All right, I'm in. Let me file the paperwork with the Beijing main office, get the travel money, and we can hit the road." For Joy, getting out of Shanghai was more enjoyable than she had imagined. For about the first 200 kilometers, the drive was pleasant and enjoyable. Billy had agreed to use his van to take her, picking her up in the early morning. Joy had been surprised to see two other people, a man and a young woman sitting in the back of the van when she slid into the front passenger seat. "They're coming along to help," Billy said casually. "From what I understand, this village has a really unique dialect of Chinese, and they both come from around the area." Joy just nodded. She had come to accept the fact that for a country that supposedly had one official language in Chinese, the seemingly endless number of dialects, regional variations, and flat-out different grammar structures meant that it was really a country with as many languages as the United States. Perhaps the only unifying element was the use of Chinese characters, but even then, there seemed to be regional differences. While Joy was decent with daily use of Mandarin, she was hopelessly lost with almost any other dialect. "Nice to meet you," she said, looking back. "You guys okay if I use English?" "My uncle has very poor English, but I can speak okay," the young woman said timidly. "My name is Tang Wen." "Nice to meet you. I am very sorry, but my Mandarin is rather poor. I will try my best, though, if your uncle would like." "It is no problem. If you do not mind, I would like to practice my English with you as we drive." Joy agreed, and for most of the drive enjoyed pleasant, if sometimes boring, conversation with Tang Wen. She was apparently a student in Shanghai, whose goal currently was to finish school and get a good job working for a computer company. Joy relaxed as the kilometers rolled by until the first refueling stop. Getting out of the van and stretching her legs, Joy saw Billy and the older man, who so far she only knew as Uncle, pointing at a map and getting into a relatively heated discussion. Joy waited until Uncle walked away before approaching. "What's up?" "Oh, he is just saying that the roads get a lot rougher from here on out and that we should have brought a different vehicle. What I keep explaining to him is that while I may have more funds than your average village goer, I'm still just a missionary, and I don't exactly have access to a Range Rover on a daily basis. Are you worried?" Billy shook his head. "Not really. The van has four-wheel drive and the tires are meant for all-terrain travel. I'll be honest, the shocks and springs aren't the best, but other than a bumpy ride, I'm pretty sure we'll get there eventually." Eventually turned out to be 7 hours, as the roads degenerated to the point that Joy was at times not sure if they were even on a real pathway. Billy stopped 3 times to ask for directions, with Tang Wen acting as a translator as the local dialects strayed further and further away from Mandarin. The sun was going down by the time Billy approached the village of Longwei. Looking around, Billy shrugged. "Not a lot here." That was an understatement in Joy's opinion. Longwei was the epitome of a country village. The main street was dirt, although the ruts were shallow compared to some of the roads they had traveled over getting there. Most of the houses were relatively ramshackle, made of wood and scavenged corrugated metal, and Joy wasn't sure, but she thought she could see a few thatched roofs on the outer edges of the village. Off in the distance, obscured by the low light of sunset, was another, larger building, but Joy couldn't tell what it was. "I don't suppose they have a Hyatt or even a Motel 6? This is China, not likely," Billy replied. "Why do you think I brought the van? We pop the back, shut off the lights, and it'll sleep 3 people. "But we have 4, Billy shrugged. "I like to sleep outdoors. I have ever since I went camping as a kid. If I need to, I can use the front passenger seat, lean it back, and I'll be fine. Seriously, you 2 get some sleep in the van." Joy nodded, looking around. "Well, where do we park then?" Billy laughed. "Right where we are. I don't see any gas stations, and at least the shoulder of the road is technically public use. First, let's get the lay of the land. Maybe we can find a place to eat. If we're lucky, they may even have a tavern or some sort of lodge or temple we could use, instead of worrying about who's going to sleep in the van." Billy put the van in gear and drove slowly through the village. There were no street lamps, and from what Joy could see, none of the houses even had electricity. While there were a few lamps burning in windows, most of the houses were dark. Obviously, in this village, people rose and went to sleep with the sun itself. Finally, in the distance, Joy could see the large building that she had spied earlier. Approaching, it became clear that it was some sort of temple, with stone buildings and a wall running around it. Unfortunately for them, the gate was closed, and Billy's knocks went unanswered. "Well, that settles it," he said, climbing back in the van and shutting it off. "Looks like we're camping here tonight. Most temples let people stay on their grounds for free, and I did pack food." "Oh, what do you have?" Tang Wen asked from the back. "You're not going to enjoy it, but I brought 2 cases of American MREs. They're easy to eat, easy to heat, and one of them is enough to fuel us for almost an entire day if we need." Tang Wen made a face but nodded. "Fine, I am hungry. Let's eat." The next morning, Joy started her investigation. Waking up a little past dawn, she gobbled her breakfast before the group started out on trying to find people to talk to. "Might as well start right here," Joy said, walking up to the now open gates of the temple. Tang Wen and Uncle followed, while Billy said he was going to find a better place to park the van. Joy's frustration with the investigation grew as the day wore on. Most of the villagers seemed very shy or even fearful of outsiders. She had thought perhaps it was due to her brown skin, but even when Billy had gone out with Uncle and Tang Wen, they had little success. By evening, Joy was almost ready to give up. The biggest challenge was language. Almost nobody in the village spoke any English at all, apart from a few children who could spout a few phrases, only to go off giggling and running up the road. The adults of the village were hardly any better, speaking a broken, heavily accented form of Chinese that sounded like total gibberish to Joy. Even Billy couldn't understand, and Uncle could only translate phrases to Tang Wen. All of them were the same too. No, nothing strange. What is a triad? We have Lucky Protector, and the ever-present unintelligible yammering. What made it worse for Joy was the particular tone of the village's dialect. She had gotten used to the higher pitches and seemingly excitable talking of Chinese, which to American ears sounded a lot like shouting and screeching, but this village's tone was on a whole new level. Even when the villagers repeated themselves to Uncle, it sounded almost painful to her ears. On the positive side for Joy, however, the village was remarkably clean and peaceful. She had gotten used to the Chinese culture that had grown under the communist regime of people often being very rude to those they didn't know. She had seen drunks kicked in the streets, children shoved out of the way of shoppers, and many other varieties of petty unkindness. But in Longwei, everything seemed the opposite. People were kind to each other. She had seen a young child, maybe no older than 3 or 4, stop to help pick up the things dropped by an old grandmother who was struggling with her load. Better yet, with nothing but a kind word, the child volunteered to carry the woman's things the rest of the way to her destination. In the fields surrounding the village, Joy watched farmers work in harmony with their animals and with each other, exchanging hearty calls and greetings across rice paddies. While the village was obviously very poor in many other aspects, it was almost a utopian setting. As the sun set, the foursome collected themselves back at the van, which Billy had ended up leaving next to the temple. So, what's your opinion, Joy? This is your story, after all. Joy shook her head. I don't know, Billy. To be honest, I'd love to stay and just observe for a while. But I don't think there's a real story here. Maybe a human interest piece, but anything on triads? No. So what's your plan? Joy sighed and stirred her ration packet, dipping her plastic spoon into a foil envelope to scoop out what was supposedly beef stew. I think I'm going to stay a while, but you should probably head back. Maybe if it was just me, and I went organic and just low-key, I might be able to see something that will give me a clue. You sure? You get in trouble out here, there's not exactly a lot of help available. Yeah, I'm sure. How about you head back to Hefei or take Uncle back to his home, and if I need help, I'll try and call. Cell phones don't work well out here, Joy. The only spot I got a signal was 2 kilometers north of here, on the main road. I know. Billy, relax. I'm a big girl, and was raised in some of the worst neighborhoods of Washington. I can take care of myself. After Billy left, Joy's confidence started to fade. Night was coming on, and while the full moon overhead seemed to cast the village in a soft white light, she realized for the first time how much light she had come to expect from things like street lamps, building signs, and other artificial means. Other than the moon, the night was black. Joy looked back at the sight of her small one-person tent, a parting gift from Billy, along with the rest of the military rations and an extra battery pack for her phone. It felt weird, knowing the thin nylon shelter was all she had, but she felt like she could deal with it. Deciding to take a walk, Joy made her way along the outside of the temple. The monks who had talked to her that morning had seemed distant but polite, although she felt like they had wanted her to leave quickly. She decided to see just how big the temple grounds were, having only seen the main atrium building that morning. As she made her way towards the west side of the temple walls, a hint of motion got her attention. Off in the distance, perhaps a few hundred meters away, she could see 2 figures making their way through the edge of the forest surrounding the village. Joy crept along, curious. When Joy got within 100 meters, her eyes opened wide and her chin dropped into her chest. In front was a man, walking like any normal person would in the moonlit darkness, arms behind his back, glancing up at the sky. What caused her reaction, however, was the creature behind him. Maybe 20 feet long, with a snake-like body but a face that looked something like a short-snouted dog, the creature looked to Joy just like the drawings of a Chinese dragon she had seen in books. The dragon was obviously stalking the strolling man and was maybe 10 feet behind him. When the dragon reared up, Joy knew she had to do something. "No, behind you!" she shouted. Both the dragon and the walking man's heads whipped towards hers. The fiery gaze of the dragon scared the hell out of her, and she took off running, scampering as best she could through the trees and grass that surrounded the temple. As she ran, she kept looking back, afraid the dragon would be on her heels at any second. Unfortunately for her, her lack of attention to where she was going caused her to miss a low-hanging tree branch, which caught her in the forehead, right above her hairline, sending her crashing to the ground, stunned. Joy lay there for a moment, until the fear of the dragon cleared her fogged mind, and she tried scrambling up. As soon as she did, she saw the dragon, less than 20 feet away, its small front legs in the air as the creature reared up on its belly and rear legs. It didn't roar but instead hissed, a snake-like sound that turned her knees to jelly and caused her bladder to release. She was too afraid to feel shame about peeing her pants through, as she fell back down, covering her head with her arms, only praying that the dragon would leave her alone. After a few moments, when she hadn't been eaten or torn apart, Joy dared to look out from behind the shield of her arms. The dragon was gone. In its place, one of the monks from the temple she had seen that morning. "You should not be here," the monk said, before turning and walking away. Before disappearing into the night, Joy could hear the monk's voice again. "Go back to your tent and go back to your life in the city. You cannot understand what you saw tonight." The surreal situation finally overtook Joy, and she fainted. Her last thought was thankfulness that she was at least already lying down.
Chapter 2. Joy woke up and the first thing she noticed was that she was in a bed. The soft texture of the cotton sheets under her made her sit up with a start. Where was the forest? Where was the man? More importantly, where was the dragon? Panic gripped her legs and Joy scrambled to get out of the bed, when a calm, sonorous baritone spoke from behind her. "Please be calm. You are safe." Joy looked around and realized the voice had come from the same man she had seen last night. He was sitting on the floor next to the head of the bed, which was pushed against the wall. She hadn't seen him at first because of the bedposts and his sitting so low. "Who are you?" "My name is Longwei. I am the leader of this village." Joy cocked her head. There was no way that Longwei could be the leader of a whole village, in her opinion. In a culture that lent a premium to experience and longevity, Longwei looked to be her age, definitely no older than 35. He was actually a bit larger than most of the Chinese men she had met, maybe about 5'10" or 11, and about 170 pounds. "No offense, but aren't you a bit young to be running this village? It is a hereditary position," Longwei replied. "My father passed away 2 years ago when I was 30. While I am young for the job, the villagers have confidence in the work I have done so far." Joy shook her head. "Wait a second. How is it you speak such fluent English? Yesterday, almost everyone my team and I talked to barely made sense in Chinese, and only a few of the little kids tried any English at all. I mean, you have a slight accent, but your words are perfect." Longwei smiled softly as he climbed to his feet. As he did, Joy was impressed at the cat-like grace and strength evident in his body. He was wearing typical peasant garb, a form-fitting pair of pants and simple t-shirt, both of which rippled with lean muscles as he moved. The children have unfortunately not taken to their lessons in English as much as I had hoped, but I am happy they tried. As for myself, my father felt it was important that I get a well-rounded international education in order to be the best leader for my people possible. So, when I was a high school student, he sent me to New Zealand for international high schooling, and later I attended the University of Oregon. I graduated with a master's degree in international relations, with a minor in business. Wow, I'm impressed. Longwei smiled, and Joy felt a pleasant warmth in her chest at the sight. She suddenly noticed one other thing about Longwei. His eyes were a light hazel gold. Every other Chinese person she had met so far had naturally brown eyes, most being so dark they almost seemed black. The image was both sexy and unsettling at the same time. Now that I have introduced myself, I would like to know more about you. Well, my name's Joy Roberts, and I'm 26. I'm a reporter for the Asian Economic Review. And for the past 6 months, I've been working in Shanghai. I see. So what brings you to my village, and who were the other 3 people with you yesterday? Joy's reporter instincts kicked in. She knew when she was getting probed for information, she had done it enough over the years of study. How about you tell me just what the hell it was I saw last night instead? Longwei tilted his head, and Joy couldn't tell if he was pleased or angry at her response. A trade, then. You tell me, and then I tell you. Joy thought it over. Okay. I came to your village because my main assignment for AER concerns trying to track down and investigate the connections between the government and the Triad. One of the people with me is a missionary who heard a story from one of his newer converts that this village is a big no-go zone for the Triads, and even the central government seems to tread very softly around these parts. I came with the missionary and 2 of his members who were acting as translators. In case you didn't know, your village dialect is very difficult to understand. It is, Longwei replied. Another thing I would modernize, but these sorts of changes take time. Besides, there are advantages to not being understood by outsiders. Of which I am one, Joy replied. Now, I told you what I'm doing, your turn. What was it I saw? What did you think you saw? Longwei asked. What I saw was something that shouldn't exist. Perhaps it was the moonlight, maybe I had some bad food, but I swore I saw a dragon, straight out of a wall painting or ancient scroll, tracking a man through a field. When I yelled, the dragon turned to come after me and I took off running. I fell and I saw you last night. I woke up here. Yes, after you passed out, I decided that perhaps I had been a bit too harsh and scared you too much, Longwei said regretfully. I brought you inside the temple and set you in the bed you are in now. I apologize that the sheets are now dirty, but I did not think you would appreciate me undressing you. The image of Longwei undressing her flashed through Joy's mind, and with it came another wave of pleasant warmth. She shook her head. It had been far too long since she'd had a date. Thank you for the consideration, but you still didn't answer my question. You're right, I haven't, Longwei said. To give you the answer you want would take a long time. Would you care for some breakfast and perhaps a walk? I would like to introduce you properly to my village. Along the way, I will tell you what I can. Breakfast was very simple and in the Chinese style, but Joy found it tasty. There was a simple rice porridge, along with some grilled vegetables and tea. I know it is not as filling as you are used to, Longwei said, but it is all grown here in the village. No, I thank you, it's delicious, Joy replied. After reporter food, street food, and MREs for 2 nights, I'm happy to have something fresh. Thank you. Shall we look at the village? As they walked around, Joy noticed a marked difference from yesterday. Today, everyone she met seemed smiling and happy to see her. Perhaps it was because she was with Longwei, but it still made the village a much nicer place to be. Around noon, they returned to the temple where Longwei had lunch waiting for them. What did you think of this morning? He asked as he poured her a cup of green tea. Joy thought for a few moments before replying. I'll be honest, it's much different than yesterday, and it was interesting to see how all the people acted towards you. They are a very kind group of people. It wasn't just that, Joy retorted. They really looked like they respected you, more than just as a village politician. Well, in a village this size, politics are a simple matter. I hope I am not just a politician, Joy nodded. Speaking of which, you never did get around to answering my questions about what I saw last night. Longwei, what did I see? Longwei looked at her levelly, and Joy had the distinct feeling she was being evaluated for something. It was a strange feeling, and one she hadn't felt since her days at Georgetown. Finally, Longwei set his tea aside and looked her in the eyes. You saw me training. Excuse me? Longwei sighed and stood up. He paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back before answering. I know this will sound insane, but what you saw was real. I come from a long line of men who have been able to transform their bodies into a dragon. According to family legend, at one time those of my bloodline numbered in the thousands. And are there others like you in the village? Joy asked, not believing but playing along. Longwei noticed her tone, but decided not to react to her disbelief. No, he said, smiling his mysterious smile again. I'm the only one. In fact, I may be the last of my kind left in the world. Again, tales my father told me say there is another bloodline of the dragon, but our family lost contact with them centuries ago. From what my father said, they may be different than us anyway. How so? Well, just as there are different mythological forms of the dragon, I think the other bloodline may resemble the European myth style more. Considering what I've seen in my travels, the chances are great. What do you mean? I am not the only shapeshifter I have met, Longwei said. I've met others. Some types are more prevalent than others. And just what have you met? Longwei shook his head. Sorry, but that would violate their privacy. Joy nodded. You must realize, Longwei, as nice as you are, it's a lot to believe that you are some sort of were-dragon shapeshifter. I know, Longwei said. Would you like to see then? You won't try and eat me? Longwei laughed. No. Unlike what the movies might say about werewolves, I retain my mind when I change. I am in control of my actions fully. Well, I guess the proof is in the pudding, as they say. Speaking of which, would you like some pudding for dessert tonight? We can have rice pudding made. Joy shook her head. You're stalling, Longwei. Longwei sighed and started taking off his clothes. Joy stood up, shocked. Whoa, whoa, whoa! What are you doing? Longwei chuckled. You did not think my clothes changed with me, did you? But you were wearing something last night. Yes, a long robe. I keep one by the corner of the temple. If you had been able to see clearly, you would have seen me wearing what looks something like a long poncho. It wasn't even belted. And you can't wear one now because it's dirty and in the wash, Longwei said. Come now, you've never seen a man naked before? Joy blushed. Longwei had already removed his shirt, and she could see how fit he was. He wasn't bulky muscular, but still very lean, with cleanly defined muscles that lined his torso. She had seen more defined men in her life, but never in person, and most of the pictures she had seen were bodybuilders or fitness models. Longwei's muscles and definition was natural and much more graceful. Part of her mind wondered how the rest of him would look. If you are uncomfortable, I can turn around, Longwei said playfully, reaching for the cord tying his pants. Part of Joy wanted him to drop his trousers right there, curious as to what she might find, but another part of her was shy and didn't want to look so slutty. Please do, she said with a tinge of regret, covering her eyes. And perhaps I should do this until you begin to change? Longwei laughed and turned around. Joy kept her eyes covered, but curiosity got the best of her, and she peeked between her fingers to see. While Longwei kept his word and kept his back turned, the parts she did see warmed more than just her blood as a surge of heat went through her body that she hadn't felt in a while. Longwei's back and legs were just as attractive as his chest and arms, and she could feel herself wanting to touch and see what those muscles would feel like under her fingers. I'm ready to change now, Longwei said quietly. Give me a few seconds and you can open your eyes. Through her fingers, Joy watched as Longwei's body started to darken in tone, the pale yellow caramel of his skin turning darker, his legs and back becoming a dark forest green before his body seemed to ripple. Look now, Longwei said, his voice turning gravelly. Joy dropped her hands as Longwei turned around. The rest of the transformation was difficult for her to see. It happened so quickly. His arms and legs shortened and his back seemed to lengthen until he was almost 15 feet long, with his legs and arms being not much more than short stumps, ending in 4-toed claws. His face also changed, his hair becoming the fringe of his head, which also stretched to look like a mythological dragon's. The only thing that didn't change on him was his eyes, which were the same intelligent yellow hazel they had been before. Joy stood up, amazed at the sight before her. She had expected to feel fear, but instead she was left with a sense of wonder at the dragon before her. Longwei exuded a sense of majestic peace and power, and she felt herself drawn to him as he looked down at her from his head, which was now 8 feet off the ground. Is that really you in there? She asked. Longwei nodded his head. Can you speak in this form? No, but in certain instances I can use my mind to communicate. Longwei said in her mind, causing Joy to gasp. I am surprised, however, at how quickly I am able to do so with you. Why is that? Because normally it takes a long amount of time. The nature of my powers is not fully understood to me. Sadly, my father died before I knew everything. Let me transform back, and I will explain. I'll wait outside, Joy said, walking out of the room. While she was curious, she was more flustered by the feelings inside her. She had never felt such an intense attraction to a man so quickly before. Sure, she had her club days when she had played the scene, but she was never a one-night stand type. She had always wanted to form a relationship, to find out more about a guy before she let her feelings get physical. But with Longwei, ever since he had taken off his shirt, all she could think about was how attractive he was. It scared her, honestly. Longwei came out about a minute later, his t-shirt and pants back on, although he hadn't yet put his socks back on. Sorry if I surprised you, Longwei said. It surprised me, and it came so naturally, I do not know why. That's okay, Joy replied. I think anyone would be surprised by what you showed me. Longwei sighed, which leaves me in a difficult position. Oh? Most of the world does not believe in my kind any longer. This is a good thing, as I think my kind was hunted down by normal human beings over hundreds of years, leading to the current situation. The only people who really know are certain members of the Triads and the higher-ups of the central government. And I'm a journalist, Joy said, sighing. You're worried that I'm going to tell the world about you. The thought has crossed my mind. I can tell from the way you talk, the way you conducted yourself, you're an inquisitive person, and it's in your nature to report the truth. I'll take that as a compliment. Longwei chuckled and started walking down the steps towards the main gate of the temple. It was. So what are you going to do? I don't suppose you'll just let me go? Longwei turned, an amused look on his face. Miss Roberts, you are not a prisoner, and I am not a man who is in the habit of harming innocent people. That's what the Triads do, and I am no Triad. So what do you want me to do? That is totally up to you, Miss Roberts. What would you like to do? Joy thought for a moment, then smiled. Well, first, I'd like to see the rest of your village. Then, if you don't mind, I'd like to stick around a while. Longwei nodded approvingly. Of course, Miss Roberts. Joy. Excuse me? Joy smiled shyly and tucked her hair behind her ear. My name's Joy, if you don't mind. Longwei returned her smile and held out his arm for her. She trotted down the steps, entwining the offered arm. Joy, a beautiful name. I shall enjoy using it. 2 days later, Joy walked up the main street towards the edge of the village. She had her phone in her hand, looking for a reception signal. As she walked, she reflected on the past few days. In many ways, they had been idyllic. Waking up every morning, she was still slowly adjusting her body clock to the sunrise to sunset pattern of the village, but it left her feeling better than she had in years. The constant exercise of walking everywhere, the healthy food and the clean air left her feeling relaxed and energetic. Best of all, though, was spending time with Longwei. He had been her constant, patient guide, showing her the entire village. He had helped translate for her as various villagers invited her into their homes, showing her how they lived. To say the standard of living in the village was simple would be an understatement. She had seen only 2 buildings with electricity so far, the village schoolhouse and the doctor's house, both of which had small generators. I insisted on getting a generator for both, Longwei had explained, because I want the children to have the best schooling available. We actually have 3 computers too. No internet, but I try to make sure the children have DVDs and computer programs. Some of them are rather good typists. And the doctors. I have insisted that all of the children get the important vaccines. We've cut the childhood disease rate by half in the past 2 years. But many of those require refrigeration. How do you fuel them? Longwei smiled. Naturally, you saw the windmills, and I am surprised you did not smell the still. Still? Yes. We use the refuse from the animals and such to make a liquid fuel. Not suitable for vehicles, but it does well enough to run a steam generator. I see. Maybe that's a thing I might not want to see, Joy joked, holding her nose. Her entire time had been like that. Pleasant surprises and quiet happiness. It felt strange to her, but she realized she was happy. It was why she was walking up the road right now, looking for a cell phone signal. It took her over an hour of walking, but finally she got 2 bars and she dialed Billy's number. Hey, Billy! Joy, I was just starting to get worried. How is the village? I'm enjoying it here, Billy. That's why I called. I was thinking I'd like to stay a while. Really? I didn't think you would go for the hayseed life. Joy laughed. Billy, I think you're the first person to use the word hayseed with me in forever. But yeah, for some strange reason, I'm comfortable here right now. Listen, can you do me a favor? If I can, what do you need? I need you to go by the AER offices and file a leave of absence for me. I can take up to 3 months no pay and still keep my job. I don't think I'll take the full thing. But yeah, I'm going to stay a while. Billy sounded confused over the signal, but Joy thought it may have just been the bad connection. It sounded like Billy was yelling down a hallway. All right, I'll stop by the offices early next week. I'm in Hong Kong tonight. Thanks, Billy. Joy hung up the phone and turned around. There was still an hour or so of daylight, and she wanted to get back to the village quickly. Tonight, Longwei said the village was having a birthday party for one of the people in town, and there was pork tonight.
Chapter 3. The weather was perfect, and Joy stretched as she took a break from her work. After being a guest of the village for a week, the urge to do something to help out became overwhelming, and she asked Longwei what she could do. It had been a challenge, learning some of the basics that the villagers had known since childbirth, such as how to pick certain vegetables and how to milk a goat. The village currently had only 3 cows, all of which were calving, so bovine milk was currently unavailable. It was a unique and subtly challenging opportunity. Today, her job was to help the school in chopping vegetables for lunch. This was her 3rd day doing the work, and she thought she finally had the hang of it. The first day, she noticed that her supervisor would quietly re-chop everything she did, so she swore to get better. The second day had shown some improvement, but today she thought she had been doing a decent job. The supervisor, a wizened old grandmother who had perhaps 10 teeth and therefore whose speech was unintelligible by almost everyone, had at least been making pleasant sounds when she brought over her bowls of vegetables to be stirred into the school's soup. Joy still felt like she was making little headway in understanding the villagers' spoken words, however. Thankfully, her limited writing ability combined with smiles, pointing, and Longwei's assistance had made things easy for the past 2 weeks. Every morning, she would work next to the villagers, whether it be in the fields or in the village itself. She had even taught English lessons to the school children, who were all fascinated by her Western clothes and mannerisms. Thinking of her clothes, Joy fingered the loose t-shirt that Longwei had lent her. After wearing her initial clothing for the first week non-stop, even she had to admit that washing the same pair of pants and shirt every night was getting a bit difficult. Longwei had talked to some of the people in the village, and the next morning she had found 3 pairs of work trousers and 4 t-shirts folded neatly and laid next to her bed. Unfortunately, none of the women in town wear undergarments that would fit your body, Longwei informed her that morning as they shared breakfast. The next time the traveling merchant is in the area, I will arrange for you to get the goods you need. Wait a second, Joy said before he could leave the room. How do you know my size? Longwei smiled his enigmatic smile. I would pretend that I have dramatic powers of observation or such, but really all that happened was that you left your clothes out to dry last night. You're a size 6 in U.S. sizes, according to your jeans. I didn't concern myself with your bra. Joy shook her head, chuckling. You're funny, Longwei. Has anyone ever told you that? Longwei shook his head. Only you. It is one of the things I appreciate about you staying for a while. For Joy, Longwei's words warmed her in ways she was coming to appreciate. It wasn't just that he was sexy. She could see past just that. Longwei also had a quiet sense of intelligence, confidence, and humor that often had her laughing while at the same time pondering things he would say to her. Joy thought about the weeks since she had called Billy and the changes she had undergone. The warmth of the sun helped her smile, and she rolled her shoulders, looking around the schoolyard as the children played before lunchtime. As she watched 2 little girls jump rope, a sudden crash and scream from inside the kitchen caught her attention. Running inside, she saw fire blooming along the wall near the stove. Today's lunch had included deep-fried dumplings, and somehow The pot of oil that was meant for frying had turned over, spilling hot oil over the wood stove and the rear wall of the kitchen. The oil was already catching fire, and the other kitchen assistant was holding her hand, which Joy could see was blistering and smoking. The cook, a pretty young woman, who Joy called Ying Ying, was screaming in a high-pitched voice, horror written on her face. Not considering the risk, Joy grabbed Ying Ying and dragged her out of the kitchen, pushing her towards the water pump that was in the corner of the yard. Pushing Ying Ying to her knees, Joy madly pumped the handle, until a torrent of cold water gushed from the outflow pipe over her hand. Joy yelled for two of the older children, pointing and gesturing, crying out, "Here! Here!" Thankfully, the two children followed instructions and took over the pumping. Joy sprinted towards the kitchen door, which now roiled with black, stinking smoke. She grabbed a bucket next to the door, scooping up dirt from the ground to throw on top of the oil. She knew that she couldn't use water. It would just spread the burning oil. The dirt seemed to make no difference, but she kept at it, running outside and getting another pail full of sandy dirt. Running back inside, Joy threw the dirt again in a wide fan, hoping to smother the flames. The heat was intense as the flames licked up the wall, and the smoke was making her cough. She was driven to continue as she couldn't imagine the village being without the school. Hacking and coughing, she got a third pail full and then a fourth. Soon she heard voices and saw Longwei and two other men of the village come running. Longwei carried a chemical extinguisher and unleashed it on the flaming stove, quickly snuffing out the fire. The emergency taken care of, Longwei turned towards Joy. "What happened?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I don't know," Joy replied, her breath quavering as the fear and adrenaline flooded her body. "I went outside to stretch after cutting the vegetables when I heard a scream. I found Ying Ying burned and got her out. Joy's body began to tremble, and she wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Longwei took her in his arms and led her out into the playground, where the two teachers had the students gathered for safety. He exchanged words with the teachers and students, reassuring their fears, before leading Joy away and under a nearby tree. "Sit," he said, helping her to the ground. Joy collapsed, her breath coming in harsh sobs. "You were very brave." Joy sobbed, the sobs interlaced with hacking coughs as she cleared the smoke from her lungs and let Longwei hold her. "Is the school damaged?" she finally asked as the coughs subsided. "How is Ying Ying?" "She is being taken to the doctors now," Longwei replied. "How are you?" "Just a bit of smoke, I'm fine," Joy replied. She moved to get up, but felt Longwei's arms wrap tighter around her. She turned to look at him and was shocked when she felt his lips kiss her. She resisted for a moment before she relaxed into the feeling, enjoying the sensuous play of his mouth against hers. When it stopped, she sat back down next to him, catching her breath. "Well now." Longwei sighed and let go of her shoulders. "I'm sorry." "What for?" "I should not have done that. You just had a shock, you're vulnerable. I reacted out of my own stress and it was a very nice first kiss," Joy finished for him. "Longwei, you don't know as much about American women as your education may have led you to think. If I didn't want you to kiss me, I would have stopped you, regardless of whether you can change into a dragon or not." Longwei laughed. "I think that's why I kissed you, too. You're the first woman in a long time who has acted like I am a normal man." Joy chuckled. "Well, other than that one little thing, from what I can see, you are a normal man, unless you're hiding something else from me." Well, there is my dragon mate and our 3 little hatchlings, and the fact that I enjoy dressing up in women's clothing on festival nights, but I think that is it." Joy's smile at his over-the-top silliness caused Longwei's face to break into a grin. "Longwei, are you trying to be a comedian?" "Only with you, Joy." "So? You spend 2 weeks calling me Miss Roberts and one little kiss and suddenly we're on a first-name basis?" Joy asked saucily, a twinkle in her eyes. "All right then. But as much as I'd like to kiss you again, let's check on Ying Ying." Joy let Longwei help her to her feet and brushed the dirt off her pants. Longwei did the same. "You know, that's not her name. Ying Ying. That's a name the government would give a panda they are sending to a zoo in the West. Joy smiled bashfully. I know, but she only told me her name once, and I couldn't understand it. I heard a sound like Ying in it, and she has a quirky habit of doubling almost everything she says to me, it sounds like. I would appreciate it if you could help me more with my Chinese. Of course, and her name is Ying Tai, so you weren't too far off. The two walked to the doctor's office, where a small group of villagers were gathered outside. Longwei approached the group, which parted without him saying anything. Still, Longwei smiled his thanks and stepped inside the doctor's office. Joy followed, and inside could see Yingtai laid out on a bed, her hand immersed in a cold water bath. The water was already cloudy with coagulated oil, but still Joy could see the deep burns and blisters on her hand. The doctor gave her an injection, and her eyes fluttered shut. He turned and spoke to Longwei in rapid Chinese, Joy picking up a little. The doctor was not born in the village, it seemed, and his accent was easier to understand. Still, Joy was a bit lost. How is she? She asked quietly. She'll be scarred, but you most likely saved her hand, Longwei replied. It will be a long process before she can use the hand again, but he thinks she can eventually use it without pain. Can you send her for treatment, skin grafts and such? No, Longwei replied. The government would not approve such things for someone from her economic status. She's just a peasant in their eyes, not deserving of such expensive medicine. Joy felt tears come to her eyes as she looked down on the pretty girl's sweating face. Even with the injection, she moaned thickly in her drug-induced sleep, her eyes squinting against the pain. Is there anything we can do? Not right now, Longwei replied, but her family will need help to take care of her during the rehabilitation process. Joy nodded. Tell her when she wakes up that I will do what I can to help her family, and she should just concern herself with getting better and listening to doctor's orders. Longwei turned to look at her. Let's talk outside. Longwei led her out of the doctor's office and towards the temple. Joy, what you offer is a very serious commitment, much more than a typical American offer. I know, Joy said, reaching out and taking Longwei's hand. They walked down the dirt road together, quietly enjoying the simple pleasure of the handhold before Joy spoke again. Longwei, what do you think of me staying here long term? I think you would be out of a job, Longwei said. Can you really be happy being a village girl? Joy thought deeply. For the rest of my life? I guess I can ask you the same question. You have a master's degree. Can you be happy being a dragon-shifting village leader for the rest of your life? Yes and no, Longwei replied. The villagers expect much of me, much more than just being a village leader. What do you mean? Longwei shrugged. The villagers expect me to lead a renaissance of sorts. They truly believe that I, or perhaps my children when I have them, will fight the Triads and the corruption in the Chinese government, destroy them, and lead our country into a new golden age. I'm supposed to be the father of this great dragon army, springing forth from my loins to cleanse Asia. Considering that I'm the only dragon I know, it's a tall order for a man who doesn't even have a girlfriend. Oh, really? And I thought here I was holding your hand and walking with you after you kissed me just an hour ago? Longwei looked over at her, his eyes questioning. Do you want to be my girlfriend? Joy laughed. That sounds very junior high school, but from what I've known of you over the past weeks, yes. Or at least, I'd like the chance to find out more. Longwei smiled his soft smile, the one Joy was coming to think about so often. I would like that too. I suppose then I'm to ask you out on a date? Well, that's normally supposed to happen before the first kiss, but yeah. Longwei chuckled. I hope you do not expect a 5-star dining experience. It had been a long time since Joy had felt so nervous on a first date. She fidgeted as she smoothed her hands over her shirt, aware this was not typical first date attire. She had no dress with her, so she hoped her button-down shirt and jeans would be fine. She waited in her room before a soft knock came on the door of what she now thought of as her room in the village temple, which she now realized doubled as a town hall and as Longwei's private residence. The door slid open, and Longwei stood there, handsome in a pair of jeans and a button-down silk shirt with mandarin collar. "I see you brought out the fancy dress," Joy said, eyeing the shirt. "Actually, the jeans were more expensive," Longwei replied. "I have kept these since I left university and only bring them out for special occasions." "I appreciate the gesture," Joy replied, taking his arm and walking down the hallway with him. "May I ask what you have planned for our date?" "It may sound trite, but I thought I would do my best to give you a taste of American-style dating," Longwei replied. "Dinner and a movie." "A movie? Just where did you get a television?" "A laptop computer from the school," Longwei said, along with a DVD. "So we are going to the school?" "No. The computer and an extra battery pack was brought here. While most of the school is undamaged, classes are canceled for tomorrow to let the smoke air out." Joy sighed. "Sorry, I didn't want to bring up such serious subjects tonight." "Do not worry. The children, by the way, have made an award for you. They would like to give it to you when the school reopens." Joy was touched by the sentiment. "Enough on that for tonight. I'm hungry." Dinner, it turned out, was a fairly accurate recreation of American-style Chinese takeout, with steaming plates of chicken in plum sauce, sweet spare ribs, fried rice, vegetables, and even spring rolls. Joy stood in awe of the spread of food on the low table before a question stopped her. "Longwei, this is too much." Longwei looked concerned. "What do you mean? Are you not hungry?" "It's not that," she replied, shaking her head. "Longwei, in the weeks I've been here, I think I've gotten a pretty good estimation of what the people of this village eat on a regular basis. You have enough meat here for an entire family, maybe even 2 or 3 days' worth. I know you don't have a supermarket in town. This chicken and pork had to come from someone's livestock. I can't take this off someone else's table." Longwei's concern evaporated, and a large smile spread across his face. "Then you do not have to worry. The chicken was from Yingtai's family as a gift for you. They had already killed it before bringing it over, so there wasn't much I could do. The pork is actually from me. I hunted a wild boar this afternoon, finding one in the woods a few kilometers away. Other than the ribs you see and the pork and the rice, the rest of it was given to Yingtai's family." "How did you hunt a boar so quickly?" Longwei's look made her smile. "Joy, there are benefits to being able to become a dragon. Being able to cover large distances and hunt efficiently is one of them. Now, no more worries about the food. It is a gift from the village and from me to you. Let's enjoy." Joy allowed herself to relax and enjoy, and was surprised at how wonderful the flavors were. "Your memory of American takeout is almost perfect," she commented. "You really nailed the differences between real and American Chinese food." "Thank you. So Joy, tell me, why did you get into journalism?" Joy thought about her answer for a long time. "I think the same reason why I offered to stay here in the village. Growing up on the poor side of Washington, I saw both the best and the worst that the United States had to offer. On one hand, there was the height of American power, where the ideals of the system were literally etched in stone. At the same time, though, I saw the dirty politicians, the money grubbers, and the corruption there. In my neighborhood, I saw smaller versions of both. I saw hustlers, street pimps, drug dealers, and gangbangers. At the same time, I saw kindness and neighbors helping each other out. I saw that so many of the problems down below were due to exploitation from those above them in the socio-economic ladder. I guess I got into journalism because I wanted to change the world for the better, and I thought I could do the most good there. And now I recognize that sometimes doing the little direct things can be just as powerful as anything else. Helping the kids get a better education, or tomorrow going out to help Yingtai's mother pick vegetables, is just as meaningful as what I was doing for AER. Longwei took a bite of his rice and set his chopsticks aside. "Now your turn. Any question you want to ask?" Joy thought long and hard, her gaze going to the ceiling as she pondered what she wanted to ask. Finally, she decided. "When you told me about the villagers' expectations of you, you didn't really answer my initial question. Are you happy being who you are as a village leader?" Longwei sighed, and then looked at her with a cocked eyebrow. "You are a hard one to dissuade from a question. Honestly, no, I cannot see being just this village's headman for the rest of my life. However, I can see myself trying to make a difference and helping free some more areas of Triad control. That's a rather dangerous dream. I know. So is being an anti-corruption journalist who takes on triads and politicians. True. After dinner, Longwei cleared away the dishes before leading her to an inner courtyard of the temple. The weather was warm for the time of year, and the sky was filled with 1,000,000 diamond pinpricks from the stars. A blanket had been spread out, and a low table held the laptop. I am sorry if the movie is not to your liking. I only have 3 movie DVDs, he said. I have wanted more, but village needs come before my own. That's okay, she said. I was thinking, if I am going to be staying here until Yingtai is healed, I will need to clear my apartment in Shanghai out. While I'm sure Billy could help with his van, do you have anywhere I could store my things? Depends on how much, but yes, Longwei replied. Let's discuss that later. Movie? Joy stretched out on the blanket and laughed when the titles came. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you have a thing for Angelina Jolie? Longwei shrugged and sat down beside her. Not really. But the other 2 movies I have are The Wizard of Oz and Dumbo. I keep them for the children. The 3rd came with them in a Hong Kong set pack. I don't know why.
Oh no, this adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Premium members. Check the description below to sign up. The love scene reference is A Dragon's Love, Chapter 3, Love Scene 1. Chapter 4. Waking up the next morning, Joy realized that she had made a life-changing decision, even without meaning to. While she had talked and offered to help out Yingtai's family the night before, she had only meant for the time it was necessary for the young woman to recuperate. This morning, though, she felt like she might be willing to stay in the village for a long time. Check that, she thought to herself. You'd be willing to go wherever Longwei wants to go for a long time. You haven't had it this bad for a man in a long time, maybe never. The thought both scared and thrilled her. After all, she had known the man for less than a month. Never mind the fact that he was a dragon. By every reasonable, logical thought process that she could imagine, her feelings for Longwei were foolishly stupid. He was a foreign national, in China of all places. He lived in a village that looked like the total annual income was less than her salary working for the AER. Oh, and he was seen as some sort of messianic figure by his village. On the other hand, he was kind. He was a very good leader of the village, by what she had seen, and he was definitely the best lover she had ever had. The sensations she had felt in her body, even with his admitted inexperience, were greater than she had ever felt. Even better, he was inexperienced in bed. She knew he wasn't some sort of player, out just to notch a belt or have a few tails to swap with his buddies down at the club. Then again, the village didn't even have a club. Stretching on the blanket, she realized that Longwei had gotten up earlier and cleaned up the small courtyard garden. She was almost cocooned in the light blanket, and she smiled, still smelling the scent of him on the fabric. The sun was just peeking over the temple wall, and she checked underneath the blanket. She was still nude, but a glance to her left showed that Longwei had considerately folded all of her clothing within arm's reach. Reaching for her shirt, she pulled it over her shoulders before wrapping the rest of the blanket around her hips like a skirt. The temple was usually empty, and she figured nobody would mind even if they did see her. Making her way quickly through the hallways, Joy darted into her room, just as she saw someone turn the corner of the corridor. Sliding the door shut, she made her way over to the small dresser she had, pulled out normal village work attire of trousers and a t-shirt, and got dressed for the day. Her tennis shoes were dirty and scuffed, but they would hold together a while longer. Pulling her hair back for work, she stopped when she heard a soft knock on her door, eerily reminiscent of the night before and Longwei. She turned and felt her heart skip a beat when Longwei opened her sliding door. "Good morning," he said with his normal soft smile. "I'm sorry that I had to leave you on the grass, but there was some work I had to complete before sunup. I didn't want to lift you. You seemed so comfortable." "Thank you," she replied, coming over and wrapping her arms around his neck. "Tell me, is there any major Chinese custom that says I can't kiss you?" "Well, no more than an American one," Longwei said. "I'd avoid doing it in front of the village's children. They tend to giggle and tease." "Then we'll just have to avoid the children for a while," Joy said, kissing Longwei tenderly. "But again, thank you." Would you like some breakfast? Longwei asked, pulling away slightly. Joy chuckled as she saw the slight bulge in his trousers. While part of her wondered if she could get him into bed with her now, she also knew he had duties to perform. Okay, while we eat, I'd like to talk about the upcoming months, Joy said, following him out. I was hoping to give Billy a call today. Oh, what for? Joy sat down at the table, which already had rice and vegetables on it. Well, we talked a little about it yesterday, but I want to get some things from my apartment, close up the place, stuff like that. Also, I was thinking maybe I can use some of my money to get some things for the children. I bet they would like some new DVDs. Longwei smiled as he scooped up a mouthful of rice. Not necessary, but I will not stop you, he replied. Would you like me to give you a list of what the children want most? Maybe, she replied. Let me talk to Billy first, see when he can come out to pick me up. Then we can make further plans. The road was dusty, but Joy was still glad to have a signal on her cell phone. She reminded herself that she would have to bring back her charger, if only so she could charge it in the school or doctor's office if needed. The connection rang, and Joy found herself tapping her foot waiting for Billy to pick up. It was kind of funny how easily some of the old mannerisms came back to her. Finally, just as she was about to hang up and send Billy a text message, she heard him pick up. Hello? Hey, Billy, long time no talk. Joy, how's live in the country? Pretty good, honestly. Listen, I need to ask you a favor. Sure, what's up? Well, some things happened, and I think I'm going to be staying here long term. And I mean real long term. So I need to clear out my stuff and get some things out here. Is there any way I could convince you to come pick me up in your van? She could hear Billy humming as he thought, or perhaps he was checking his calendar. Okay, I can meet you in the village in about a week. I've got a service I am preaching out there. If you don't mind taking an extra day getting back, and then about 3 days in Shanghai to clear your stuff, I can do it for you. That's great, Billy, Joy said, jumping excitedly in the dirt. Listen, my battery is almost dead, so I may not be able to know when you are getting close. So, what day are you thinking you'll be in town? Let's say, if everything goes right, a week from tomorrow. Excellent, thanks, Billy. Joy closed her phone and headed back to the village. If she had a week, she and Longwei would have plenty of time to make a list of things she could pick up in her time in Shanghai, starting with DVDs for the kids and medicine for Yingtai. Billy was true to his word, pulling up exactly as he had promised right around lunchtime. Joy came out of the village doctor's to greet him. She had been in to visit Yingtai and with Longwei's help told her about Joy helping out. She was just telling the young woman about what the school children were having for lunch when the puttering sound of Billy's van came through the doorway. Smiling, Joy excused herself before sticking her head out the door, flagging down Billy, who was still 50 meters down the road. It was amazing to her how far sound carried when there was so little man-made cacophony around. Wow, you've gone country, Billy remarked after giving her a friendly hug. It looks good on you. Joy smiled and stepped back. Thanks. Billy, this is Longwei, the leader of the village. Longwei, this is Long Pao Chin, or Billy, as he likes to be called in English. The two men exchanged greetings in Chinese before Billy switched back to English. So he's the guy, huh? What do you mean? Joy asked nervously. She was sure she hadn't said anything about Longwei's secret to Billy, but still, she was nervous. I mean, this is the guy you're in love with, Billy said with a laugh. At the shocked expressions on both of their faces, his laughter grew. Come on, Joy. I knew from the moment I met you the only way to pull you away from the reporting gig would be if you found love, and I mean real love. Also, your body language was practically screaming that you wanted me to like Longwei when you introduced us. I'm no police profiler, but I can read people pretty good. Whatever the case may be, Longwei said tightly. There is another reason Joy has decided to stay here for a while. Longwei led Billy inside the doctor's office, where Yingtai was getting her hand rewrapped carefully with gauze. She faces a long and difficult rehabilitation, Joy said sadly. I've agreed to stay and help Yingtai until she can use her hand again. I see. You know, I know a medical supply guy back in Shanghai. I bet I can get some medicine from him if you think it would help, Billy said, smiling and looking at Longwei. It would truly be my pleasure. Longwei nodded. Your generosity is most welcome. However, you must be exhausted and should rest and be refreshed before you and Joy head back to Shanghai. How about some lunch? Over a simple lunch, Longwei and Billy chatted in Mandarin, which allowed Joy to at least follow along and interject in English occasionally. Thankfully for her, both men seemed to like each other with only the minimum amount of uncomfortable silences and figuring each other out. Since both men had spent time in university in the United States, they had a common ground to work from. They even had some good-natured verbal sparring in the sports area, where Billy's UCLA and Longwei's Oregon had been conference rivals for years. By the end of lunch, while the men couldn't be called friends, Joy was at least happy that they could coexist peacefully. Longwei had a somber look on his face as Joy put her bag in the van through her for a moment. "What is it?" she asked, worried. "I will miss you," Longwei said. "I have grown used to having my breakfast and dinner with you." Joy smiled and quickly kissed him on the cheek. "I'll miss you too, but it's only for about a week." Longwei nodded, and Joy climbed into the passenger's seat of the van. While the sun was going down soon, Billy could make his other stop on the way back to Shanghai before midnight if they left now. Billy beeped his horn twice and pulled away. Joy watched Longwei's figure disappear in the rear window until he was too small to see. Turning back to the front, Joy could see Billy looking at her out of the corner of his eye. "What?" Billy smiled and turned on the van's CD player. The heavy guitar of rock music started up from the speakers as Billy looked back out at the road. "You've got it bad, Joy. Real bad." Emptying out her apartment in Shanghai was surprisingly simple for Joy. Her landlord, in a show of generosity, was willing to waive the early lease termination fees if she was willing to leave behind most of her furniture. He would be able to rent the space out for more as a furnished apartment than as an unfurnished place. Since the village didn't have electricity in all but the school and the doctor's office, she didn't see the point of keeping most of it anyway. She could take her laptop, her CD and DVD collection, and the clothes that would be useful in the village. She also decided to take as much dry and preserved food as Billy could carry. More difficult for her was talking to the AER offices. Her boss, whom she had only ever met once as his office was in Beijing, was a bit of a stickler on the rights to her research. Finally, after agreeing that any stories she had submitted but had not had published could be used without her byline, he relented, and she cleaned out her desk. As she did, she saw a final email on her office computer. Curious, she opened it and was chilled by the contents. "Your lies have injured some very honorable people. If you do not cease your investigations, you will be punished for your actions." The unsigned email was from an anonymous address, and the spelling errors made her suspect it was from a Chinese source. She was no idiot. She could see the fingerprint of the Triad on the message even if it was unsigned. She flipped open her phone, calling Billy. "Hey Billy, just got a threat from what I think are Triads. You worried?" Billy asked back. In the background, Joy could hear traffic sounds. He must have been driving. "I don't think so," Joy said. "The message is a few days old and seems to be more of a warning to stop my investigating more than a direct threat on me. Since that's happening anyways, I don't think there's a problem." "All right. Still, if you like, I can be ready to leave town tonight." Joy shook her head, even though she was on the phone. "No, I think it's all okay. There's supposed to be nothing new coming out with my byline, and if I drop off the scene, they'll leave me alone." "Okay, so what's your plan for this afternoon?" "I'm going shopping, actually. There are some things I want to take back to the village with me, and since I'm leaving all the furniture behind, your van will have plenty of space." "Great. Hey, I talked to the medical supply guy I know, and he said he'll be able to get you some medicine for that girl's hand. He even got most of it for free. Technically, you're getting a lot of samples. Most of the rest he's writing off on the company's charity budget. You're only going to need about $30 for the rest." "Wow, you're a miracle worker. You know that, Billy?" "Not me, Joy. I just work for the miracle worker, remember?" Joy chuckled. Even though she didn't have Billy's evangelical faith, she could appreciate his goodness anyway. "Okay, Billy. I'll see you in 3 days, with the cash you need for the stuff you got." Joy left the office after exchanging goodbyes with the reporters on duty. It wasn't all that painful, she hadn't really liked any of them, and made her way to go shopping. In addition to more durable clothing for herself, she still had to find some DVDs for the children, and she had a few other ideas in mind, including a mini solar panel charger so she could trickle charge her own computer and cell phone if need be. As Joy walked, she started to get a weird feeling. Looking around, nothing seemed out of place, but as the feeling persisted, she noticed there were two men who seemed to be following her. They were relatively nondescript, but both were consistently 10 meters behind her. When Joy stopped to look in a window, they would stop. When she moved on, they moved on as well. Joy considered darting into a police station or turning back, but knew either one was useless. The police would do nothing without a direct threat, and even then may have been on the take. By keeping herself in public as much as possible, she minimized the chances of something happening. Still, knowing the men were following her took a lot of the pleasure out of her shopping expedition, and she took care of things in a utilitarian fashion. In addition to more trousers and underclothes, she bought 2 pairs of work boots and a pair of galoshes. In a supermarket, she bought dried goods in addition to coconut oil, one of the few natural ingredients she could find to treat her hair. Chinese ideas of hair care did not mesh with black hair, that was for sure. Her final stop was the music store, where she relaxed and found plenty of DVDs for both the school and for Longwei. Departing the store with her bags, she saw the 2 men, who were waiting outside at a food stall, and she shrugged. As long as they were just keeping her under observation, she could deal with it. Billy helped her pack her last things into the van. She carried all of her money in cash, a wad of bills that she would have felt uncomfortable with in her childhood neighborhood. Even in Shanghai, it made her nervous. Billy lifted the last sack of rice into the back of his van and closed the back gate. "All right, that's everything. Hey, you okay?" "Yeah, I guess," Joy said, looking around nervously. "But let's get going, okay? Having those guys tail me and then to be standing here with all my cash is kind of freaking me out." As they pulled away, neither Joy nor Billy noticed the man on the cell phone across the street. He nodded a few times, speaking in rapid Chinese. "Yes, they just left," he said into his phone. "She's with that missionary." "No, I couldn't hear anything, but from what she loaded into the van, I think she is leaving town." The man nodded a few more times to the sound of his phone, before a smile spread over his features. "Of course. Getting into the apartment will be easy. I will check it out now." 10 minutes later, the man closed the door on Joy's apartment, slipping the lockpicks back inside his pants pocket. A quick glance revealed that she was definitely leaving. The place had the antiseptic look of a moved-out room. The sheets were stripped off the bed, the shelves were empty, even the television and other appliances were unplugged. The man looked around, seeing if he could find any clues about where she was going. A search of the living room revealed nothing. Joy, if anything, was a fastidious cleaner. The bathroom and bedroom area also were scrubbed relatively clean. Finally, in the kitchen next to the refrigerator, he thought he found something. A notepad, the type that people used to write down quick messages on the phone or shopping lists. When he picked it up to the light, he could see that it had been used recently. The paper on top still bore the imprints of writing. Curious to try something he had once seen in a movie, the man took a pencil and knife out of his pocket. He shaved off graphite dust and carefully scattered it over the paper. It took him a few minutes of tapping and work, but he could see English letters start to form over the page. Thankfully, this was why his boss had put him on the job of following the American journalist. His English was better than many of the other triads. "Gauze, rubbing alcohol, DVD for Longwei," the man read, the last part catching his attention. He called his boss on his phone, shifting back into Chinese. "Sir? Yeah, it's me. Listen, she's got a name on here, one you told me to keep my eyes out for. I found a shopping list and the name Longwei appears on here." "Yeah? Okay, I'll bring the paper. Heading back now." The man scooped up the pad of paper and left the apartment. Whoever this Longwei person was that the American was apparently mixed up with sort of saddened the man. He had been tasked with watching the American since the first of her articles had come out, and had come to appreciate the uniqueness of her beauty in a city of Chinese. More than once he had watched her through binoculars at night in her apartment, clad in nothing but light pajamas. Yet, if the boss's tone was correct, he wouldn't be able to see the chocolate-skinned beauty again. She soon would be dead.
Chapter 5. Joy wiped her sleeve across her forehead. She had been tasked to work in the vegetable fields today, and had spent the past 4 hours working on her hands and knees, carefully weeding in between the rows, making sure the field was as pristine as possible. She wasn't alone. There were 4 other people with her. 2 of them were members of Yingtai's family, while the other two were older children from the school. Longwei had a policy of letting the children help out in the fields one day a week, in order to let them get hands-on practical experience, as well as academic learning. Besides, he had explained to her, the fresh air and exercise is very useful for their bodies. Joy didn't know about the educational benefits, but she did enjoy the outdoor work. The villagers had a very unique style, while perhaps not the most efficient in the short term, ensured that everyone moved around on a regular basis, avoiding the dreaded crouching posture that she had seen so many other poor Asian farmers adopt. Few, if any, of the older women in the village had the bowed, osteoporosis-laden body she had seen even in Shanghai. Looking up the row, Joy saw the large barrel on a cart that served as their watering point. The oxen used for pulling the cart were gone, but would be brought back later. She got up off the ground, exchanging waves with the other people in the field. She still had problems speaking much more than basic Mandarin, but she thought her ears were finally becoming attuned to the local dialect. She could understand some of the basic greetings and words, and was grateful to the school children who had sort of adopted her as one of their own. Two of the students, a boy named Due and a girl named Ming, had worked with her almost every day, slowly and carefully pronouncing words in storybooks and around the classroom for her. She copied, making many mistakes, but was making progress. At the water barrel, Joy dipped in her cup and took a deep drink of the clear water. It was another thing she had quickly gotten used to. Even without the so-called benefits of modern water treatment plants, the water from the wells in the village was pristine. Wiping her mouth with the sleeve of her shirt, Joy blinked. Coming out of the forest across the field were two men, neither of which Joy had seen before. Squinting, she was sure something was going on, as both men were dressed in what looked like camouflage tactical gear. Joy looked around and called to one of the other people in the field with her. "Hey!" One of the other field workers, a young man, looked up. Joy waved and pointed at the two men approaching from out of the forest. "Longwei!" she yelled, pointing and gesturing. "Get Longwei!" The man didn't know what the word "get" meant, but he followed her pointing, and upon seeing the two strangers, scrambled to his feet. He took off, running back towards the main body of the village, while the other three people stood up. Joy was shocked when the two strangers, upon seeing their approach had been discovered, pulled out automatic rifles, firing on the group. The villagers screamed, and Joy felt instincts she hadn't used in years kick in. The instincts developed in the poor Washington, D.C. streets, and she dove for cover behind the cart, making sure to keep the wheels between her and the attackers. Glancing out from behind her cover, she saw as the attackers made their way towards them. Luckily, nobody was hurt in the initial burst of gunfire, and Joy was thankful to see the other three villagers scampering away as fast as they could. Unfortunately for her, she saw the two gunmen making their way towards her. She looked around desperately, looking for anything she could use to keep the gunmen away or distracted while she ran away. However, the only things she could see were a couple of farm tools, small handheld scythes they used for cutting stubborn weeds, and a hoe that could be used if necessary. Neither was enough to allow her to defend herself against gunmen with automatic weapons. Peeking out again, she saw the gunmen were now halfway across the fields. Confident in their prey, they were walking casually, not rushing into any situation. One of them pointed his rifle at Joy, so she ducked back behind cover before he could squeeze off any fire in her direction. Getting to her knees, she dug her toes into the dirt, bracing her left foot against the cart's tire. While she wasn't a track star, there was no way she was going to just sit there and let the gunmen come and slaughter her. Joy came into a crouch, her knuckles in the dirt, and took a deep breath. With an internal yell, she sprinted away from the cart, keeping herself low and using the cart for as much cover as she could. After 2 seconds, she cut to her right, starting to zigzag her way across the field she was in towards the village. She heard the rattling bark of gunfire and dove, rolling as she did before pivoting and sprinting the other direction. She saw a berm in the field ahead and dove behind it, just as automatic fire chewed up the ground she was hiding behind. Joy's breath was liquid fire in her throat. The exertion of the all-out sprint combined with the fear sent her heart rate through the roof. She regretted not wearing her running shoes today of all things, choosing instead one of the pairs of sturdy work boots she had picked up the habit of wearing in the 2 weeks since Billy had brought her back. At least this wasn't the first day I wore these, she thought. I never would have made it then. Joy heard a sliding snapping sound and realized the gunmen were reloading. Taking advantage of the momentary respite, she scrambled to her feet to take off again, seeing a large rock maybe 50 meters ahead of her. If she could make it there, she might have a chance. Just as she started to sprint, a harrowing roar split the early afternoon air. From the corner of her eye, she saw a green blur come from the direction of the village. Not stopping her run, she dashed behind the rock, dropping to cover just as she heard a sharp scream and gunfire bray in response. None of the gunfire was in her direction, however, so she turned to see what had happened. What she saw amazed her. Longwei, in full dragon form, had already killed one of the gunmen, the body laying in 2 pieces on the ground. The second was pointing his rifle at Longwei, who was circling him with his jaw open, a harsh rasping sound coming from his mouth as his tongue flickered back and forth. The second gunman was obviously terrified, but managed to squeeze off another burst of fire towards Longwei. Joy swore she saw Longwei's image almost shimmer in the air before darting forward, the powerful jaws snapping around the barrel of the gun to tear it out of the gunman's grasp. The same move caught part of the gunman's left hand, severing it and sending hot jets of blood spurting into the air. The gunman dropped to the ground, screaming before passing out, and Longwei quickly shifted back to his human form. Pulling the man's shirt off, he quickly knotted it around the gunman's wrist before twisting, making a rough tourniquet and stopping the blood flow. Joy came running up, her desire to help Longwei overriding her instinct to flee. "What can I do?" she asked, kneeling next to him. "Are you all right?" he asked her in reply before glancing around. "The hand cutter." She grabbed the tool off the cart, giving it to Longwei, who threaded it through the wraps of the tourniquet to give him a better handle to twist with. When the blood flow was fully cut off, he locked the handle down using the man's belt. "The doctor will be here soon," Longwei replied. "Are you hurt?" "No," Joy replied. "Just scared out of my wits." "I understand. Help me with the other." Joy looked on in disgust at the other body, which had been torn almost in half at the stomach area. Longwei shook his head in frustration. "Help me search the body, quickly," he said, "before his blood ruins any documents or anything else that may help us figure out who just tried to kill you." Swallowing her gorge, Joy started patting down the legs of the half-corpse, pulling out a wallet and some papers from a pocket. Longwei took the upper body, yanking off the remains of the man's tactical vest before quickly emptying his chest pocket. He then grabbed the belt, setting it with the tactical vest until he was sure the rest of the torso was searched. Joy held up what she had found, which he took and started looking over. His face clouded blackly, and she swore she could see his eyes flash greenish in anger. "What is it?" "Triads," he said, handing her a piece of notepaper. "I will guarantee you once we wash this man's body, we will find a triad tattoo on him somewhere. The paper is a full description of you, and directions to the village from Hefei." "What? But why?" Longwei looked down at the surviving gunman, his face tight with anger. "That is what I want to know as well." That night, as Joy lay in her bed, she couldn't find sleep. She thought after the adrenaline wore off and hours wore on, she would be exhausted. Instead, she could tell from a quick glance at her cell phone clock that it was now almost 11 at night, and she had spent the past 3 hours tossing and turning in her bed, the lights off. Finally, with a huff of anger, she threw the covers off, pulling on a tank top to go with the boxer shorts she normally wore to bed. Heading out into the halls of the temple, she headed towards the courtyard, where perhaps she could get some fresh air and let herself find sleep. As she walked near the small room that Longwei and her often used for eating meals together, she saw a flickering light. Coming closer, she saw Longwei sitting up, a single candle illuminating the room as he read from a book. Joy was surprised to see the title. "I didn't think you were into Nietzsche," Joy said quietly, trying to avoid startling him. "You okay?" Longwei replied quietly, as he turned a page on the book. I actually don't like him very much. He's very convoluted. But I thought after today it would be more fitting to my mental state than Marcus Aurelius. I see, Joy said. Should I leave you alone then? Longwei shook his head, setting his book aside. No. Actually, I've been sitting here trying not to go to you this whole time. I was afraid that if I did, I would not be in control of myself. What do you mean? Joy asked, sitting in the chair next to him. When Longwei didn't answer, she reached out, placing her hand on top of his. Come on, Longwei, talk to me. Longwei stared into his lap, and his voice was barely audible. I was scared today, he whispered, his voice harsh. I've never been scared before. Well, that's to be expected, Joy replied. They had automatic guns, even if you're in your dragon form. Their guns could not have hurt me, Longwei said, cutting her off. You saw how easily I dodged their bullets. Joy, I was scared because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you.
Oh no, this adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Premium members. Check the description below to sign up. The love scene reference is A Dragon's Love, Chapter 5, Love Scene 2. Chapter 6. Joy inhaled deeply before remembering the air was thick with tobacco smoke. Coughing softly, she took a moment to clear her lungs before centering herself, focusing on the next few minutes. It had been a long time since she had done any singing in public. The initial plan had seemed simple, but now seemed helplessly foolish. After stripping and searching the Triad bodies, Longwei had discussed the situation with some of the other village elders, men he trusted and had known since he was a boy. In a sign of how important Joy was becoming to him, he included her in all of the meetings, even if she didn't understand much, if any, of what was being said. Still, he had filled her in, explaining that while the written note had included directions on how to get to the village from Shanghai, the men that had attacked were actually members of a much closer sect of the Triad, based in the nearby industrial city of Hefei. That they were armed with automatic weapons was more concerning, because it meant that the Triads were willing to risk serious governmental reprisal. The initial plan was for Longwei to try and go in alone, but Joy had nixed that. No offense, Longwei, but you're a man, and it will take you years to gain their trust and penetrate the layers of their organization to the point of doing anything meaningful. So what do you propose? Joy laughed. We use a weapon that men worldwide have been weak to since the beginning of time. The conversation had led her here, to this Triad-controlled nightclub deep in the Triad-controlled pleasure district of Hefei. She was standing backstage, dressed in a tight blue velvet dress, her breasts pushed together to create maximum cleavage, a long slit running almost all the way to her hip. She was thankful she had some singing ability, as the waitresses in the club wore even more revealing clothing, and from what she could see, were groped by the patrons on an almost regular basis. Glancing to her left, she looked into the club's tiny kitchen, where she saw Longwei studiously washing dishes. He spared her a worried glance but smiled, which she dared to return. Officially, their cover story was they didn't know each other, and just happened to start working at the club at about the same time. They even kept separate apartments, dives that were tiny and cramped, but within a block of each other. It had been this way for the past 2 weeks. The club manager came to the back, chattering at her angrily in the Hefei dialect. While closer to Mandarin than the villages, she could still only catch about 1 word in 3 he was saying, although she got the message. It was her time on stage. Stepping through the curtain, she thought again how fortunate she was that the local Triad head favored what Longwei had derisively called a rainbow policy for girls working in his club. With a fetish for all types of foreign girl, the boss had hired girls from most areas of the world for his nightclub act and as waitresses. Those who could sing, like the blonde Russian before her and the petite Filipina after, were given slightly better positions as entertainers. Those who couldn't sing but had some grace, like the Japanese girl she had seen, and the Latina who Joy wasn't sure where she was from, worked as dancers, ranging from semi to full-on exotic strippers. The worst positions were saved for the girls who couldn't sing or dance, but whose bodies were desirable to the Triad boss. They served as what were officially deemed hostesses, but were often little more than grope dolls for drunken, horny Triads who thought that grabbing a foreign tit or ass was no big deal, and was just good fun. Joy had even heard that many of the girls were coerced into sleeping with various triads, whether for money or through threats of bodily injury. Thankfully, none had approached her for such favors, although most of the triads undressed her with their eyes every time she walked on stage. As such, she carefully selected her routine to avoid any songs that she wanted to have a positive feeling about later. Instead, she had chosen every slinky, slutty song she could think of from the realm of R&B, jazz, and even some pop music, as long as it was made famous by what the manager had called dark peoples. Starting off with the sultry tones of "Given Him Something He Can Feel," Joy launched into her set, sashaying her hips and popping a pose occasionally to accentuate her lyrics. She knew that probably none of the triads were fluent in English, so she didn't worry about accuracy of the lyrics and instead making sure she kept her voice as lustful as possible. She wanted these assholes to think that she was so horny that she would jump off of the small nightclub stage into their laps at almost any moment, begging for them to satisfy her. Most nights it took more effort to keep up the charade than she would have expected, and she had to close her eyes and imagine she was singing for Longwei to make it through the 40-minute set. Winding her way from En Vogue to Toni Braxton to Aaliyah, and finally wrapping up with classic Marvin Gaye, Joy was glad when the last notes of sexual healing drifted away over the sound system, and she was able to make her way backstage. The Filipina girl was up next, shaking her head ruefully. "I hate going on after you," the girl said, one of 4 or 5 in the club who spoke passable English. "Why?" Joy asked, grabbing a terry washcloth and wiping at her forehead. She'd have to reapply her makeup for her second set, but it didn't matter. "Because you make them so hot, I have to ramp up my set to full sexy to not make them bored," she said. Joy felt a moment of pity. Luana was from Mindanao in the Philippines and had grown up in a hamlet so poor, many children went nude until puberty. While she didn't like the looks from the triads, she needed the money. And as she had told Joy, being stared at by those Chinese fucks is better than what a lot of the girls in my village are doing to make money. I at least don't need to spread my legs for my pay. Joy shivered at the thought and gave Luana a reassuring smile. "You'll do fine. You're a much better singer than I am." Luana laughed softly, her almond-shaped eyes rolling. "We both know they don't care at all about how well we sing." The manager stuck his head backstage, his normal flow of yammer breaking up their conversation. Joy made her way to the back, through the kitchen where she was able to grab a drink of water. The back door was open, allowing at least a hint of fresh night air, even if it was redolent with the stench of the garbage in the alley. Still, for Joy was ambrosia compared to the tobacco, alcohol, and sweat stench of the club itself. She was just gathering herself to come back inside when Longwei stepped out. Supposedly taking his 10-minute break, he was allowed every shift. The club owner was generous, and Longwei had a small bowl of rice and fried pork in his hand. Joy smiled. "So, what did you think of my set?" "As usual, I wish I could have been in the crowd," Longwei quietly replied, eating quickly. "Will you do the same songs for the later set?" "No," Joy replied. "From what I think the manager told me, the boss is coming in tonight and he wants sexier music, is what he said. I'm going with some really raunchy stuff from my youth and college days. Pure filth. But for some reason they were songs people bought a lot of." "I shall look forward to hearing it." Changing the subject, Joy looked inside quickly. "How are things at home?" Longwei shrugged. He had to be surreptitious, going back and forth to the village on almost a daily basis, slipping into dragon mode to make the journey possible, where he could cover the distance from the village to Haifei in just under an hour. He was exhausted, and Joy could see it in his face. "Yingtai is doing better. Your medicines are helping. The Triad is still being held until we know what to do with him." "Do the elders still want to have him killed?" Joy asked. It was one of the most contentious parts of the plan, and Joy was glad that Longwei had finally gotten the elders to promise not to harm the man until they had gotten more information. Joy thought that, more than the supposed reason of checking on the day-to-day operations of the village, was why he went back so often. "Yes, but they are abiding by the agreement," Longwei said tiredly. "By the way, the children miss you. Ming specifically asked me to inquire if you are keeping up on your Chinese studies." Joy chuckled at the innocent persistence of the girl and nodded. "Yes, but I doubt she'll like some of the words I've picked up from the triads around here." Longwei grimaced and nodded. "Yeah." Joy glanced inside and saw the manager looking around in the back. Well, there's the manager. Let me get inside before he starts wondering. Can you stop by my place later? You know that's dangerous. Being without you is worse, Joy said softly. Longwei looked her in the eye for a moment and nodded, causing her to smile. See you later. Stepping inside, she headed straight for the manager, who was babbling. Listen, Joe, she said, using her own chosen name for the man. You need to slow the hell down before I can understand what you want. One more time? The manager repeated himself a bit more slowly, and Joy went with what she thought was the information he wanted. Yeah, the new playlist. Give me 5 minutes to write it down and you can start downloading it quickly. It's not that damn hard. The boss of Hefei was a bulky man, one of the few truly fat Chinese Joy had seen in this part of the country, with a greasy pompadour on his head that looked like he was trying to be an extra in a 1960s Elvis movie. As soon as he came in the door, she could sense a palpable change in the atmosphere of the club as the minor flunkies all straightened up a little bit, and their posturing took on a servile quality to the enormous man. He settled himself into a table in front of the stage, and Joy watched as 3 of the so-called hostesses immediately scampered over to sit with him, one of them on his lap. The man's hand went to the poor girl's hip immediately, his smile revealing rotten, blackened teeth. Joy felt her gorge rise as she knew she would have to at least get within talking distance of this pig of a man. Luana was doing her second set, finishing up one song early as the manager cut her off. Coming backstage, she gave Joy a sad smile. Good luck, she said. And Joy could tell that the girl was truly glad not to be the center of the boss's attention. It concerned her, as she knew how desperate Luana was for money to send back home. Stepping on stage, Joy tried her mental trick of imagining Longwei, but it wasn't working. Even from 2 meters away, the fetid blend of powerful cologne and body odor wafted off the man, and she desperately wanted to gag. She knew to do so was dangerous, so she fought it down and instead fell into another role. Setting her face into a mask, she felt herself split into 2 personalities. The outer personality that was grinding and moaning to the sounds of Adina Howard and TLC, while on the inside she was sitting back, laughing at the obvious way she was playing the man. She could see the bastard lick his lips, his eyes glistening with lust as she cavorted and play-acted, pretending she was performing just for him. Part of her realized she was, but not in the intent he thought. She was intentionally playing him, and she realized the intoxicating power she wielded in her hands and voice. When the last notes faded away, the boss was totally under her control, it seemed, as he pushed the poor girl who had been in his lap off, standing up and applauding. Instead of heading backstage, Joy took the small step down to make her way over to the boss's table, sitting down next to him with a false smile on her face. Thank you for the kind applause, she said, fluttering her eyelashes. You good singer, the boss replied, his eyes fixed on her cleavage. How long you here? I've only been here a few weeks, sir, Joy said with mock deference. She cast her eyes down and put her hands in her lap, the position squeezing her breasts together more and causing his breathing to speed up. Joy kept up with her cover story as a starving artist looking for her big break. It's a great opportunity you've given me here. Yes, I see, the man replied, his elementary English failing him either through lack of ability or mind clouded with lust. She heard him order some drinks, and his hand settled on her knee as a scared waitress brought them over. With the drinks and a new act stepping on stage, the boss turned his attention towards other business. 2 other men came over and joined them at the table, arrogant enough for Joy to tell they were still high-ranking triads, but were still subservient to their boss. Over the J-pop sounds of the girl on stage, the men discussed various items, and Joy was thankful for the language lessons she had been taking. She was able to pick up more of the conversation than any of the men knew, and what she heard shocked her. As soon as the boss was drunk enough, she excused herself, pleading needing to go to the bathroom, and slipped into the back. She found Longwei washing dishes, and she tapped him on the shoulder, heading out the back door. Get your stuff, she said, looking nervously inside. We need to get home now. What do you mean? Longwei asked. What did you hear? The boss had me sit at his table, Joy replied, and pulled 2 other men over. Longwei? They're nervous about the 2 men he sent to kill me not coming back. Thankfully, the Shanghai description was very sketchy. They only knew I was a black woman. He told the other men to send another group, larger this time, to take care of the entire problem. Longwei, he's sending a death squad to the village in 3 days. Longwei nodded and looked down the alley. He looked at Joy, who took his hand. Let's get out of here. He thinks I'm in the toilet, and I didn't bring anything I need here. Okay, Longwei said, glancing inside the back door. Nobody was paying attention, so he quickly led her down the dark alley and into the street. Joy knew they were an incongruous sight. The curvy black woman in a slinky dress holding hands with a dirty man in a dishwasher's apron. But it didn't matter. If they could make it just a few more kilometers, they'd be able to get out of the city. Traveling back to the village was the most thrilling experience Joy had ever felt. Longwei had led her back to her apartment to change quickly into some jeans and a t-shirt, ditching the trampy heels for her now comfortable work boots she had brought from the city. They had left everything else behind, except for a cheap tablet computer Joy had bought for storing information. Slipping it into a small backpack, Longwei had led her out of the city in plain sight, taking the city bus system to the train station and getting on the local train to the tiny city of Luan, just a bit closer to the village. Stepping into the borders of Luan, Longwei had turned to Joy, slipping out of his t-shirt. After I change, climb on, he said, looking around. They were in an industrial park, but there were few lights around, and no cars. Joy watched as Longwei shifted into his dragon form, her breath still catching in her throat at the sight. Picking up his discarded t-shirt, she climbed on his back, just above what she assumed was his shoulders, or at least his dragon equivalent. He reared up, allowing her to wrap the shirt around his neck like a harness, his throat solid and unyielding against the pressure. From where she was now perched, she was at about the height of a car, and Longwei took off across the countryside, darting over grass and rocks smoothly. The closest impression that Joy could think of was riding a motorcycle. Longwei in dragon form was remarkably fast, making turns and adjustments almost faster than she could perceive the need. Different from a motorcycle, though, was the warm feeling of his blood rushing through his body and the sensual, undulating ripple of his muscles beneath her. It was unique and in its own way sexy, but for Joy the most fun part was the speed. The wind rushed by her, broken up only slightly by the Longwei's blunt snout, and she realized he was actually slowing down to allow her to not be thrown off by his progress. It wasn't even midnight by her estimation when she saw the familiar shape of the village temple in the light of the almost full moon. We have to do that again, Joy said as they approached the temple. Is it always so thrilling? You're the first person I've ever let do that, Longwei replied through his mental link, and yes, it was very nice. I will be happy to let you do that again. But first, we have a village to protect, Joy said, turning her eyes back towards Heifei. And if what I heard was correct, we only have a few days.
Chapter 7. Longwei and Joy's report to the villagers sent everything into a frenzy. Gathering everyone inside the temple, Longwei laid out the situation, his mind laying out the plan he had thought of during the cross-country dash back to the village. He had filled in the details of his plan as they traveled, using his mental link. We have the best chance to avoid the loss of life if we can shift the attackers off the roads and into the surrounding woods, Longwei had said. There, I can use my dragon form to eliminate more of the gunmen while keeping the villagers safe. Are you bulletproof in dragon form? Joy asked, thinking of the last attack. I swore that guy couldn't miss from that range. No, I am not invulnerable, Longwei replied. However, I am much faster than human eyes can track, and can use that to my advantage. However, enough things coming from enough angles, and my skin can tear just as easily as any other creature's. Then, it's just a matter of my body mass. Body mass? Imagine shooting a grizzly bear with a small rifle. Unless you hit in a vital spot immediately, all you've done is create a very angry bear. Will the Triads know this and prepare accordingly? Let's hope not. The plan was pretty simple, in Joy's opinion. All of the children and those unable to fight were to retreat to the temple, deep within the protection of ancient walls. Those who could fight would be in the woods with Longwei, even though all they had were 2 rifles. The main element of the defense was to use the time they had to prepare. Joy and Longwei both had long experience with action movies and mined every bit of pop culture between them for ideas. The first thing to eliminate was use of the road leading into town. A group of 12 villagers started digging a trap in the road, where the forest pushed in on both sides, one of the only choke points on the approach to the village. If they could cause the attackers to dismount from their vehicles there, they could force them into the woods. Smaller teams of villagers dug up smaller man-sized traps throughout the forest, each villager older than 8 responsible for at least 2 traps. While it hurt Joy's heart, each man trap was lined with sharp sticks, like a tiger trap. There would be no taking prisoners this time. Joy fell in with the main road diggers, attacking the packed earth with hoe and spade, until the muscles between her shoulder blades burned. The work was different than the field work or other tasks she had done since arriving in the village. There was almost none of the banter and pleasant talk that had highlighted every other endeavor. The villagers dug in silence, their faces grim as they hacked at the earth. The car trap was a massive undertaking, taking up the entire width of the road for a length of almost 20 feet and a maximum depth of 6. Instead of swallowing the entire vehicle, the idea was to create a barrier. The bottom of the pit was lined with plastic and filled with precious fuel for the generators, swirled and blended with pig droppings. Once lit, the flaming dung would create a napalm-like wall of fire blocking the road. Forced out of their vehicles, 2 village gunmen would then fire from protected bunkers towards the attackers in the attempt to drive them into the woods where Longwei and the others could handle the rest. The one factor that nobody knew was just how many men the Triad would send. Hefei was not a large city by Chinese standards, and in their time there, Joy and Longwei estimated that there were less than 1,000 Triads in the city, most of which were in no position to be members of an assassination squad. Still, a squad larger than 20 or 30 would be almost impossible to defend against. The village worked long into the night, using precious candles and lanterns to supplement the clear moonlight to guide the digging. The main trap was finished on the first day, and the bunkers were done on the second. Disguised as piles of compost, the bunkers were protected by not just packed earth, but a thick layer of rocks from the roadbed. By the end of the second night, over 3,000 man-traps had been dug in the forest surrounding the village. Even if the village did survive the attack, there would be no safe hunting in the eastern forest for months to come, if not years. The only controversy that came was when Joy informed Longwei that she would be one of the people manning the bunkers near the roadside trap. "This all started because of me," she said. "If they see me, they might just get stupid and give you an easier time." "You're putting yourself in grave danger," Longwei replied, stroking her arms gently. It was the end of the second night, and both of them lay on his bed, cuddled together. While Joy knew she wished she could express her desire for him physically, she was too exhausted to even consider the possibility of sex. "I know. But you're going to be in greater danger," Joy said. "You're not going to be behind a foot of rock and dirt. You're not going to be a dragon." "Well, we can't have everything," Joy said, closing her eyes. She tried to sleep, but could feel her mind rebelling against the idea. Finally, she sat up, her breath puffing between her nostrils. "Fuck." "What's wrong?" Longwei asked, his voice not blurred by sleep at all. Joy was surprised. She was sure he had been asleep against her. "Did I pinch you?" "No, I just can't sleep. My mind keeps going forward to what is going to happen tomorrow, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared." Longwei nodded. "I understand. I guess I was lucky. The first time I had to kill someone, it happened unexpectedly. I reacted by instinct, so I did not have worry beforehand." "Tell me about it," Joy said quietly. "You were there," Longwei answered, just as quietly. "I still think about it at times. So what do I do? If I go out there exhausted, I'm not going to be very effective help." Longwei stayed quiet for a moment, then sat up behind her. "You must quiet your mind to allow the body to speak," he said. "Here, join me." Getting off the bed, he sat down on the floor in a half-lotus position, his hands on his knees. Joy joined him tentatively, trying to copy his posture. "The posture itself is not important tonight," he soothed, taking her hands. "Instead, just focus on my hands holding yours, and the feeling of the breath coming in and out of your lungs. Try to imagine that breath as fog. With each intake, That fog brings in peace, filling your body with quiet stillness. With every breath out, you send the fears and the bad images out, to evaporate into the surrounding air. Joy tried to follow Longwei's advice, listening as he continued with his soothing, calming mantra. She could feel the words have effect, and she relaxed. Within minutes, she slipped into sleep, and Longwei gently maneuvered her until her head lay in his lap, her body stretched out on the floor. Stroking her hair lovingly, he resumed his meditation, preparing himself for the upcoming attack. Longwei had been sure that nobody would attack during the nighttime. The Triads knew that there were literally dragons in the village, and would be afraid to attack when a dragon would have not just the speed and strength advantage, but the cloak of darkness as well. Still, he kept lookouts posted in all 4 directions, working in pairs to allow for reports back to the village. Each team also was equipped with signal mirrors to flash back to the village if necessary. The morning of the attack, the villagers tried to go about their normal business. The school children had classes, cooks prepared soups and rice, and other daily activities went on. What made it strange, however, was that every activity took place within 200 meters of the walls of the temple. When the alarm came, there had to be almost instantaneous response. Joy was stationed on the top of the temple, checking the horizon, when the first flash came in from the western lookout. There hadn't been time to create any complicated codes, so the simple triple flash was all she needed to know. The attack was coming. Scrambling down from the roof, she called to Longwei. The villagers quickly mobilized, and before the first lookout could even make it back to the village, the defenses were ready. The car trap had been covered over with a mesh of dirt, bamboo, and leaves to look almost like it had before. Joy slid into her bunker, picking up the automatic rifle and checking the action once again. Thankfully, the first attackers had favored a variant of the AK-47, and a few of the older villagers had familiarity with the weapon. Simple and reliable, she quickly chambered a round and waited. Longwei kept himself next to her bunker, ready for the first scout to arrive. When the scout arrived, he quickly exchanged words with Longwei, who talked urgently with the man. Nodding, he sent him back into the forest, to blend in and try and ambush anyone who came in through the woods. Longwei stuck his head in the back of the small bunker. 4 trucks, maybe 20 to 25 men, all armed with machine guns from what they saw. He figures we have 5 minutes. Joy nodded and socked her rifle to her shoulder. I'll be ready. As the minutes worked by, Joy kept her calm by repeating the important facts to herself. She had 50 rounds for her rifle, in 2 clips. The bunker was exactly 75 meters away from the car trap. At that distance, aiming for the belt was important to avoid shooting high. Breathe, relax, and squeeze. Don't jerk the trigger. 50 rounds. Make them count. It actually took 6 minutes for the first truck to round the curve of the road. It was going about 30 miles an hour, not slow, but not speeding either. Joy could see it was a pickup truck, with a driver and 1 passenger in front, while 4 gunmen were in the back, 2 of them standing and already aiming down the road. Joy switched off her safety and got ready. When the truck hit the car trap, the results were better and more dramatic than anyone had expected. When they had dug the trap, the design was for a car or SUV. The truck was front-heavy, and the impact of its nose into the end of the trap not only crumpled the front, sending the engine block crashing through the cab, crushing both occupants. The men in the bed of the truck were catapulted forward, crashing to the earth hard. One of them didn't get up. Seeing the other men start to get to their feet, Joy squeezed off rounds, hitting one of the men in the chest, while the other bunker took care of the others. Turning her attention to the other trucks, Joy fired again, trying to pick out men as they jumped from the beds of the other pickups. Thankfully, the second part of their plan worked, and the heat from the engine of the other truck set the fuel in the ditch on fire, cutting off the rest of the road from direct assault. Men scattered under the rifle fire, a few of them dropping to the dirt to return what they could. Thankfully, Joy felt very secure in the bunker, dropping down every few shots to prevent return fire. She heard some more screams and the sound of men crashing into the woods. Those heading south soon ran into a line of man traps, their screams adding to the sounds. Those heading north found an easier path at first, but Joy knew what was waiting for them. In the northern field, Longwei waited. Longwei lowered himself as much as possible, knowing that he had to strike quickly and invisibly. He was in between the first staggered line of man-traps and the villagers waiting to attack, hoping not to need their sacrifice. Regardless of the villagers' bravery, they were using farm implements against automatic rifles. Longwei heard the snap and crash as another of the attackers fell into a man-trap, and then the twanging sound as another trap, a snare trap that was normally used to capture wild boar, sprung. These triads may have automatic weapons, but Longwei was sure none of them had grown up in a countryside village. Sliding forward, he edged closer, seeing his prey. There were still 8 men left, one of them seemingly leading the others. He was shouting orders, pointing up the ridge as the others ducked for cover behind trees as Joy and the other bunker continued to fire. 2 brave souls charged deeper into the forest, ducking behind trees and treading carefully. Longwei knew it was time to act. Darting forward at his top speed, he whipped his tail into the first man as he passed him, the tree trunk like appendage crushing his chest while sending him flying. Whirling, Longwei snapped his jaws, taking off the second brave man's arm at the shoulder. The remaining gunman, seeing Longwei's effect, started firing in his direction. He was moving too fast for them to get accurate aim, but still there were a few close misses in the wild shooting, and Longwei wheeled, darting deeper into the woods. The gunman reacted as he had hoped, charging after him. He slowed down just a bit, giving them a better view of his hide before disappearing behind a line of bushes. Flattening himself in the dirt, he waited until he heard another man-trap claim a victim before whirling out of the bush, staying low to the dirt. There were only 4 men left, and his snapping jaws took care of them in a few seconds. The last one got off a lucky shot, hitting Longwei in the tail, but it was a minor wound, scraping scales and flesh only. The silence as the last of the gunmen were killed was strange. Longwei looked around at the ambush site, which only 3 minutes before had been a quiet stretch of country dirt road, was now the site of a bloodbath. 1 truck was on fire, another 4 were parked, and bodies littered the ground in all directions. Longwei went down to the road, looking back the way the Triad had come, doing his best to make sure none escaped. He couldn't see or hear any, and he turned his attention back to the burning hulk on the road. Shifting into human form, he staggered. Reaching down, he took his hand away from his right leg, covered in blood. So wounds could transfer from dragon to human form, he thought. How interesting. Going to a knee, he looked up to see Joy running towards him, her rifle slung around her neck. "Somebody get the fucking doctor!" she yelled as she ran up, throwing his arm around her neck. Leaning on Joy's shoulder, Longwei took a few tentative steps before nodding to her. The wound stung, but he could still walk. "I'm fine," he said carefully. "Gather the weapons." Joy looked him in the eyes carefully before following his request, gathering the discarded weapons on the ground before checking the pickup truck cabs. Most of the trucks had some sort of cargo boxes in the back, which Longwei was certain contained more ammunition. Making his way carefully around the flaming pit, Longwei limped over to the bunkers, where he had stashed an extra pair of pants. He was a dragon, but he still felt uncomfortable going around naked in human form. Longwei felt the bandage wrapped around his thigh rub uncomfortably as he looked down on the wounded Triad. The survivor of the previous attack, the terrified man, was the only one he had let live. Most of the wounded Triads who fell into the man-traps bled out before the doctor could even begin to treat their wounds. The others died even as the doctor worked on them. The traps had been effective. Longwei stared at the man who was tied up and shivering. His missing fingers had been sutured, and his face was still pale from the blood loss. Picking the man up, Longwei set him in the driver's seat of the rearmost pickup, which had been turned around carefully. "Now, do you know the way back to your boss?" he asked carefully, looking the man in his eyes and speaking in clear Mandarin. When the Triad nodded, Longwei continued. "Good. Go back and tell your boss 2 things. First, tell him what happened here. Tell him this is what happens whenever any of your people even try to come to this village. And secondly, tell him that the Triad's time is coming to a close. I am coming." The Triad nodded fearfully, and Longwei slipped the keys into the ignition. The engine cranked over, and the Triad shot down the road towards home, accelerating as he went. Joy came over and looked at the rapidly disappearing taillights. "Was that a good idea?" "I don't know," Longwei said, "but I'm not going to go killing prisoners. We killed today because we had to, but I'm not a butcher of unarmed prisoners. It may be a subtle difference between the Triad and me, but it's still a difference." Joy nodded. "I can accept that difference. Come on, we've got a lot of cleaning up to do."
Chapter 8. Joy was stunned by the transformation of the temple. The villagers had quickly decorated the normally serene temple after the battle with festive colors, with paper lanterns and streamers hanging everywhere. Joy had spent the entire afternoon working on cleaning up the battle site, gathering the guns left behind and burying the bodies of the Triad. Thankfully, most had died in the deep man-traps and required little more than scooping dirt on top of the corpse. The rest were to be buried in the car trap, which was already over 4 feet deep. Joy had avoided that work for the most part, though, as she was one of the few people in the village who knew how to drive a car. Once the fire in the car trap went out, they pulled the wreckage out using another 2 trucks, then filled in the gap enough to let her slowly drive the pickups around the barrier, parking them near the school. Over the next week, the plan was to strip the trucks of everything useful to the village. For Joy, the trembles had begun as she pulled the second truck over the quickly filled-in section of road and started driving to the village. In her mind, she kept seeing the explosion as the fuel in the car trap went up and could hear the bullets pinging off the stone facade of the bunker. She was proud that she hadn't frozen up, but knew she needed to purge her feelings. Stepping into the temple, which the left-behind villagers had adorned so festively, she felt conflicted. Part of her wanted to celebrate, to rejoice in the victory and in still being alive. On the other hand, part of her wanted to scream and cry over the horror she had seen that day and the lives she had taken. Even if they were Triad bastards, they were still human beings. Avoiding the celebration, Joy made her way to her room, washing the dirt off her skin and changing into clothes that didn't reek of gasoline, blood, gunpowder, and sweat. Staying in the back of the temple, she found Longwei sitting quietly in the inner private courtyard. The sight of him in the place where they had first made love pushed back the darkness, and she sat down beside him. "How's the leg?" Longwei opened his eyes, his small smile breaking out on his face as he saw her. "The bleeding has stopped. It seems that while wounds carry over, I heal from them more quickly as well. The doctor says I will carry a small scar in my human form on my leg, but nothing more than that. And your dragon form, I'd hate to see those perfect scales marred." Longwei chuckled. "I do not know. It is not like there are many dragon experts in the world."
"Oh no, this adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Premium members. Check the description below to sign up. The love scene reference is A Dragon's Love, Chapter 8, Love Scene 3.
Sputtering, Joy rolled off and sat up to hear the giggles of children running down the hallway. One of the children stopped and yelled something back at them before running off again. Joy looked over at Longwei, who was wiping the last bits of water from his eyes. "What did they say?" "They said too much heat starts a fire," he laughed. "I guess that's their way of saying stop making a public scene." "Well, maybe I can get them back," Joy said, getting to her feet and chasing them down the hallway. Longwei surged to his feet and joined in the merry chase. The lights were low, allowing the city lights of Hong Kong to stand out clearly against the night sky. The penthouse on top of the skyscraper was expensive, but it wasn't like he couldn't afford it. Taking a deep drag of his Turkish cigarette, he looked out at the peaceful skyline, knowing that in the teeming streets below, he controlled things. He was the man in charge of it all, and with a simple word or gesture, he could cause the whole thing to come crashing to a halt. He considered such an action now. For too long, he had let Long Sui-yu stay autonomous, a benign tumor in the body of his kingdom. He had even let those fools in the central government do as they pleased with the village, sending in money and supplies on occasion. It kept the dragons quiet, at least. But now this. It wasn't like he could have anticipated the connection between the American journalist and the dragon. She had gone from an annoying fly in the ointment, a minor situation best dealt with through indirect means, to a major situation. Her work had laid open too many vital elements of his organization, even if she hadn't known what she held. He was grateful that his telecom connections had caught her file transfer before it left China, but he was sure she still had the hard data. The woman's apartment was picked clean, and he knew no journalist would leave their computer behind. She had it with her in the village, that was for sure. Still, for all of his power, the man knew that he wasn't omnipotent. The Triads controlled most of China and had tendrils winding their way through many areas of Asia and North America, but that didn't mean he could shut down the world's second-largest economy because a few men were killed. Things had to be handled appropriately, after all. He looked over at the other two men in the penthouse, both of whom were standing in deference to his position. The first was a fat pig of a man, his lieutenant who had been tasked with taking charge of things in the industrial city of Hefei. The other was one of his gunmen, whose hand was still bandaged after the dragon had left it with only 3 fingers. He looked haggard and scared. He should have been... So none of the other men survived? None, boss. I thought I had sent enough. There were 24 men, all armed with Kalashnikovs. The boss nodded. For most cases, you would have been right. He tapped a button on the arm of his chair, and 4 bodyguards stepped into the room. The boss continued, his voice rising into a thunderous roar. For a normal fucking village, you goddamned idiot. I sent you to Hefei with the express briefing on what Longwei contained, and you send in a squad of only 24? You could have sent twice as many, and with the warning they apparently had because you can't keep your head out of your pathetic dick and it wouldn't have mattered. And you, he continued, looking at the other man, you were defeated when you had a clear shot. You could have shot her from hundreds of meters away, and instead you walk in like an American fucking cowboy? Fucking incompetent. He nodded to his bodyguards, who grabbed the wounded gunman by his arms. The man struggled, but to no avail as the massive bodyguard's strength was equal to their size. Carrying him like a child, they dragged him out to the balcony before throwing his body over the edge. His scream echoed for a few seconds before fading out of sight. The other 2 bodyguards used the opportunity to close in on the fat boss of Hefei, kicking him in the back of the knee and forcing him down before locking his arms in their steely grip. The boss of all Triads looked at his underling, his fury not yet abated. Now what the fuck should I do with you? I don't think my men would appreciate having you join the coward. You'd make too much of a mess on the pavement to clean up. Please, boss, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. The man blubbered, his fat lips flapping as tears and spittle rolled down his cheeks. The boss nodded. All right, one more chance. Perhaps some of it was my fault, not taking a more personal interest in the story sooner. But know this. Disappoint me again, and the dragon is going to be the least of your worries. The boss looked out his window at Hong Kong, his fingers tightening into a fist. I want Longwei wiped from history. The end.